and I'm really excited. Oh, there we go, recording. And I'm really excited to host tonight's important discussion along with our great panel. So just to introduce everyone, we have Sophie Howe, who's the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. We also have the member of the Senedd, Jane Dodds, who is leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. We have Beth, who is the MP for the Cynon Valley, and Amerjit Kaur-Dhaliwal, who is deputy leader of the Wales Green Party. So just before we start, I thought I'd just give an update on where we are with the pilot. And so if anyone might have seen we actually released an article this morning just outlining where the pilot is and some of the things we want to see from the design of the pilot. So the basic income pilot will begin during the next financial year, and it will involve participants who are leaving the care system. The pilot will run for 3 years, and each participant will receive monthly payments of £1,600 after their 18th birthday when they officially leave the care system. And it's expected that over 500 care leavers will be eligible to take part. Essentially, anyone can take part who leaves care. So it could be over, and the numbers aren't known because some people might choose not to take part. But the pilot, which has been allocated £24.5 million funding by the Welsh Government, will run across 4 years. So the basic income rate is in line with, oh sorry, my computer's gone a bit funny there. The basic income rate is in line with the real living wage, and while it will be subject to taxation, which means participants will be exempt from additional benefits, many care leavers will actually be provided with more financial support via the basic income pilot, as opposed to if it wasn't running. And so UBI Lab Cymru are calling for a comprehensive package of support along with basic income payments to fully support care leavers. And we want to ensure that the pilot is also intersectional in its design, considering all care leavers across Wales and the structural barriers that they face, along with the barriers that leaving the care system presents to young people. And I just think we wanted to stress that, it's not enough to simply sort of make it like a tick box exercise and hope that, oh, well, by just including the people that leave care this year, we're bound to have some sort of representation from groups. I think we need to see more than that, really, and we need to see an approach from people designing the pilot, from the Welsh Government, for people to include care leavers from BAME communities, LGBTQ+ community, those with disabilities and women, and there needs to be a concerted effort to understand the barriers that these care leavers face and a desire to help let them attempt to overcome some of these barriers. We're very aware that just giving people money and a bit of support every month is not going to eliminate the barriers they face at all. But we do not want people from such communities to simply just be involved, like I said, like a tick box exercise. We want to see that when this pilot ends, the research that can be developed throughout, focusing on different groups and to understand how basic income helps care leavers, but also care leavers from different demographics of society who will have different experiences of the pilot. And so if I could just go into asking some questions now to kick off the discussion. Firstly, Beth, if I could come to you. The cost of living crisis is affecting people up and down the country. Does the situation we found ourselves in prove that it is time for a universal basic income?
Diolch yn fawr, Lydia, thank you very much. And I just want to begin by thanking UBI Lab Network and UBI Lab Wales for the absolutely outstanding work that you've done in recent years. You really have been instrumental in bringing the pilot in Wales to fruition. And I want to say the same thanks to our Future Generations Commissioner, Sophie Howe, because I know behind the scenes you've been doing a lot of excellent work as well, and everybody else. I suppose most importantly, local people in Wales as well have got involved in the labs and really pushed this from a grassroots level, and it shows the power of collective action for me. So in terms of the question, we are facing the worst cost of living crisis in at least 50 years. And it really is absolutely frightening what is facing people. We've had the national insurance hike, social security benefits have only been increased by about 3.1%, which is a real terms cut possibly of 7% this year if inflation increases to 10%. And we have in Wales, sadly, the highest poverty levels in the United Kingdom. And on a UK level, there's about 4.3 million children living in poverty, and that's about 9 out of 30 children in every class. And the crisis that is facing us is probably going to plunge at least 1.3 million more people into poverty. People would have seen in the news over the last few days and months that the energy prices are going to reach absolutely astronomical levels, going up by about £600 from the change in the energy cap of this month. Food prices have gone up at least 20% over the last 12 months. Fuel is increasing. But unfortunately, at the same time, wages, well, they're not even not going up, they're remaining stagnant in many regards. So we really are facing a crisis. And I spoke at a People's Assembly demonstration on Saturday, along with trade union comrades and others. And, you know, there is a real fear about the implications of this for local people. And I just want to mention as well that I launched a cost of living survey on Friday in the Cynon Valley, and by yesterday morning we'd received approximately 540 responses, which is unknown in terms of the work that I've been doing in the constituency, and we've got some really harrowing stories from local people. This hasn't got to happen, and it shouldn't happen in the 5th richest nation in the world. And for me, UBI can and should play a central role in redressing the inequities that exist in the United Kingdom. UBI, for me, needs to be part of a wider transformational agenda, but it is a key aspect of it, because having a basic income, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure the panelists share my view, is a basic human right. Just like having food or having heating, it should be treated as a basic human right. And it's not about having enough money just to scrape by. It's about having enough money to have a decent standard of living, which everybody in society deserves. And a UBI, which is not means tested, it's universal, it's non-discriminatory, is for me a positive way in which to ensure that everybody has a fair standard of living. I did touch on the fact, and I will finish, sorry, because I'm conscious of time in a moment, that is part of a bigger agenda. So in addition to that, you know, I, along with colleagues in Parliament, are calling for a £15 minimum wage for those people in work. People need good work. We need to ban 0-hour contracts. Fire and hire should be outlawed. What happened to the P&O workers recently is absolutely appalling. We also have to have fair funding for Wales. And the devolution settlement is not being respected at the moment. UK government's trying to re-centralise power and ride roughshod over the Welsh government. But we need a proper settlement and fair funding, which we're not getting at present in Wales. And I'll also mention the fact that this has to be underpinned by the transition to a green economy. And all the work that I do is underpinned by the necessity now to tackle the impending climate crisis. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from my colleagues from the Green Party later on that particular issue, how that's interlinked with the UBI debate. I'll finish by saying that given the constraints that are placed on Welsh Government currently, I can only commend Welsh Government for the pilot. Yes, it may not be a universal basic income, but it's progress. And, you know, outside of Wales, Welsh Government is looked at, particularly by Labour Party and those on the left, as a progressive, radical government that's willing to work in cooperation with other parties as well on issues like UBI. And for me, the pilot is a step in the right direction, and I think is extremely important that we all support it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, no, great. Thank you so much, Beth. I think, you know, we agree there's a lot of campaigning around not just a basic income pilot, but also trials of a 4-day working week. And I think, yeah, collectively, if we put some of these innovative ideas together, the changes we could see could be really transformative. But yeah, open that question up to any of the panel members then, if anyone wants to jump in. Yeah, Amerjit.
Hi. So what we have to realise is that economists and advocates of UBI predicted this situation over 30 years ago. The economic, like the environmental crisis, is man-made. So either consciously or via inaction or through absolute negligence, decisions that have been made for us by politicians and business leaders and people in power over the last 30 years have led us to this point. This is not something we find ourselves in. This is something that has been constructed. Thank you for the question, by the way. So it's insecurity, it's fear, it's feeling demoralized, that our tactics that right-wingers have used for decades in order to divide and rule. Equality is something that they do not advocate. If they did, we wouldn't be in this situation. And to think that right-wingers, to think that the right wing care about us is self-denial. You know, public still voted for them, people in power still voted for them. So whether they're conservative or independent, people are still voting for them. Ultimately, these guys are protectionists and they will protect them and theirs only. We know through dozens of pilot studies from all around the world, people benefit mentally and physically. Families are better educated, they're more entrepreneurial, they're stronger, and ultimately more engaged in their communities. Crucially, they are not beholden to those who seek to control others in order to seek personal gain, such as moneylenders or unethical businesses and governments. I would say that there is enough evidence out there for the Senate to start showing increased leadership over this matter and roll out UBI nationally. The Green Party had been advocating UBI for decades.
Great, thank you, Amerjit. That was a really good contribution there. And would anyone else like to come in on this question at all? Hi, yes, Sophie. Hi.
Hi, thanks, diolch Lydia, noswaith pawb. I think that for me, one of the reasons why I've been sort of so keen on advocating for a UBI, and I have to also, you know, pay tribute to the work that UBI Labs have done and the cross-party work that's gone on. You know, you can see that cross-party consensus here with Beth and Jane and Amerjit, and you know there are many others in the Senedd and in Parliament and elsewhere. Local authorities have been passing motions about having a UBI trial in their area, and I think that's incredibly powerful. But I think, you know, from my perspective, as obviously someone who's sort of interested in how do we plan and prepare for the future, a UBI has got to be part of that debate and that discussion. And I think Amerjit's absolutely right that you know, a lot of this we could see coming, really. We've just sort of chosen to kind of bury our heads in the sand, and we're really good at just, you know, finding money in a crisis, which tends to only ever be a sticking plaster for problems that have emerged. And so what we really need to be doing here is, and it's a big, you know, task and a big ask, is that we're trying to fundamentally sort of reform a failed system whilst also trying to deal with the consequences that people are feeling at the moment, which is why I think it is really brave for the Welsh Government to be going down this path, albeit, and you know, maybe we'll come on to the ins and outs of the pros and cons of the current sort of pilot and so on in a little while, but it is a really brave decision that is sort of, you know, starting the journey towards a really progressive policy. Why is it so critical for it to be part of the debate on how we support people in a fair and equitable society in the future? Well, there's quite a number of future trends and scenarios which are really interlinked with this. So things like the changing nature of work, rises in the gig economy, so 35% rise in zero-hour contracts in the last couple of years. So that means that our social security system, that safety net, as it was described, is no longer a safety net for many people. Obviously, then you've got the cost of living crisis, which again, it sort of, breaks my heart that we're yet again talking about a crisis that could have potentially been avoided rather than getting up front of things to sort of prevent it. But whilst we're in the middle of that cost of living crisis at the moment, the long-term effects of poverty are even more scary, the costs of poverty to society. So when we talk about, oh, it's all too expensive, and my modelling shows, which is the report that I did was a slightly different model to the Welsh Government payments for care leavers, but it showed that it could, for £6.8 billion, we could halve poverty in Wales and reduce child poverty by 64%. And when we look then at the long-term costs, what it actually costs society to keep people in poverty and not take action to get them out of poverty, the costs of child poverty alone, £37.7 billion. So yes, we can say that it costs a lot of money to do that, and it is a lot of money, there's no shying away from that, but actually we're already paying a lot of money to give people worst outcomes and to give society worse outcomes. If we look in particular at the kind of health impacts of poverty, so the World Health Organization have done some really good work looking at what are the factors that make the biggest difference in terms of the life expectancy gap. So I often say I'm, here in Whitchurch in Cardiff, I've got every chance of living 10 years longer than someone who lives 3 miles down the road from me in Grangetown. And that's predominantly to do with poverty. So 35% of what makes a difference to that gap in life expectancy is to do with income security. 29% is about living conditions. And I would argue that actually, of course, your living conditions are also linked to your income security and so on. And so, we're actually talking about, years of life here that poverty is taking away from people. So I think that as a kind of sensible and compassionate society, it's got to be part of the solution. The final thing that I just wanted to mention, and I could go on and on about different future trends and scenarios that relate to this, but one of the other crises, sadly, that we're in the middle of is a care crisis. So we can't meet the care needs of an ageing population as they stand at the moment. And we know that people are living longer, and by 2036 we'll have sort of double the number of over 85s. And we're going to have to start having conversations, yes, about how we're valuing carers in a much better way, but also what's the role of community and family, and how can we ensure that community and family have support so that predominantly women, as it is still the case and likely to still be the case, who are having to reduce their hours in work to care for elderly residents and friends and so on, are meeting the burden of being in this sort of sandwich generation of caring for children and caring for older people. I actually think that a package of a reduced working week, reduced working hours, and potentially with the universal basic income could be a really significant policy intervention in helping us to meet that those care needs that are coming down the line at us. So from my perspective, there are these, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. There's it's definitely that say in our generation's NHS, a once in a lifetime opportunity here in Wales now to make this pilot work, to move it on to the next phase so that we are not chasing our tails and just putting sticking plasters on when, all of this, becomes completely impossible in a few years' time, but we've actually got a proper future fit safety net in place for the next generation and those yet to come.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sophie. I think your point about, sort of sticking plasters on social problems has been a long feature now, hasn't it? And everyone talks about the upfront cost, perhaps, of a basic income pilot. But, austerity has a cost, poverty has a cost, and it's met by the NHS and different social services. So I think there's a really good point to raise there. And Jane, did you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, just diolch yn fawr iawn noswaith dda chi gyd. It's lovely to be here on this panel with with an all women panel. So lovely to be here with you. I wish we could all meet in a room and also meet with our wonderful guests as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Diolch yn fawr iawn. I don't want to add very much. The cost of living crisis for me is about people losing their dignity. It's about people not being able to afford those basics and going out to, get them from places that we wouldn't normally go to. Many families turning to food banks on top of what's happened before. And for me, UBI is about putting the power back into people's hands so that people can make the choices that they need to make without worrying about how to make ends meet. And that's for me what UBI is about. And I know we'll talk about lots of other things here this evening, but really I just wanted to just give you my take on UBI. It's about power in people's hands to give them dignity and making sure that they don't have to worry about how they're going to make ends meet. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Yeah, great. Diolch. Thank you, Jane, for that. And Sophie, if I could come to you next for the next question. We've recently had more details from the Welsh Government on the basic income pilot, and just wanted to ask really, what are your thoughts on the design and how do you think it could be improved?
Sorry. So I think, we're pretty pleased with what we've seen so far. So there's still a lot of detail to be worked through. So, and obviously I'm sort of caveating what I was saying with, I would have liked to have seen a full UBI pilot across a geographical area covering all different types of demographics. But this is a starting point and a good one. We like the fact that the Welsh Government are doing quite a lot of involvement around this. I think sometimes the government's policy development fails to hear the voice, the lived experiences of people. So they're doing quite a lot of work with talking to older care experienced people about what would have helped to sort of change their circumstances and to improve their circumstances. They're talking to organisations like Voices from Care and directly with local authorities and so on. And that's what one of the principles that the Future Generations Act requires, is sort of involvement of people and interested organisations, not just in a kind of way that we consult them after we decided what to do, but to actually form the way the policy is designed in the first place. We like the fact that they are engaging really regularly with interested parties and stakeholders, including my office. UBI Labs have got a position on the kind of expert reference group, which is really important. And Mr. UBI himself, Guy Standing, who's been involved in a vast number of the different pilots across the world, is part of that advisory group as well. So that's really good. I think we were really pleasantly surprised by the level of the amount of money that is being allocated. Even in the analysis that I did, which was looking across a UBI across all demographics, but we were looking at a potentially lower level. But it's really good that the Welsh Government have gone straight in there with the £1,600 in line with the real living wage, and we think that it's probably one of the highest payments in any of the trials across the globe, so setting the bar pretty high there. However, there's still some kind of big questions around the pilot. So we don't know much yet about the distribution and the logistics of how care leavers will access it, how they will claim it. We know that getting people to claim things and getting understanding around that is often challenging. So we need more details around that. I really think that the points that you were making, Lydia, in the article in the National today about a package of wraparound support is really, really relevant. And I think for this particular cohort, I've sort of almost been thinking of it a bit like the housing first model. So, maybe we're calling it income first. Not that I want to change the name of a UBI, but it's kind of income first, if you like, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that we need that kind of wraparound support for these group of care leavers who will have been through traumatic and challenging circumstances. So it's not going to be, it's really significant, but it's not going to be enough to just give them that impact. I think that in terms of the fact that it is that smaller and very specific cohort, and not a geographical pilot, that does cause some problems in terms of the evaluation, particularly around community impact. Some modelling that was done in the book that I commissioned with an organisation called Autonomy looked at the potential at community impact, spend in the local economy, increased entrepreneurship and so on and so on. And you're not going to necessarily get that sort of impact or be able to evaluate it in a dispersed trial rather than a geographical trial. And then, finally, we don't know much yet about the evaluation. So encouraged by the people that the Welsh Government have got on that expert group. If there's anyone who can craft a brilliant, and comprehensive evaluation, they've got those experts there, but it still is going to be quite challenging because of the narrowness of the cohort. And really what I'm wanting to see is, how are we going to be able to evaluate it? Yes, in terms of the impact that it's making for that particular group of care leavers, which, who without doubt, are a group of people who absolutely need that level of support. But how are we going to ensure that that evaluation can take us from that group to a full universal basic income? So those are some of my thoughts. But again, I agree with Beth, really. The Welsh Government have got to be commended for putting their head above the parapet here, and really trialling some, a really progressive policy.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Sophie. I think the point on wraparound support is an important one, definitely. And I myself was really pleased to see that they have involved voices from care, and they're really trying to get out, I suppose, an evidence base while designing the pilot. So that is a great step. If I could just remind people if they could possibly just remain on mute, because sometimes there's a bit of interference. And would anyone else on the panel like to jump in on this question? Yeah, Jane, I can see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Diolch yn fawr iawn. So I was a child protection social worker for 27 years, so worked with care experienced young people. And I think it's an amazing step that the Welsh Government have taken. Yes, I agree with Sophie, and I'm sure everybody on this panel, and I'm sure many people listening in, that we would have preferred that this trial was rolled out to more people all over Wales. But it's a step forward, and the amounts, as you've heard, are, way beyond any of us accepted. Agree with everything that Sophie said. I'm sure other people will echo as well. For me, key to this is something that I called on, which is the Welsh Government organising guardians for every single one of these care experienced young people. In fact, we've called for a model of the Scottish guardianship system to look at how we can support not just these young people, but also separated refugee children as well. Because actually the big concern I have, and having worked with care experienced young people, and there may be some on this call this evening, it'd be great. I don't know if we can engineer a way of hearing from them or organisations that work with care experienced young people, is that their lives are pretty, can be disorganised and stressful. So we just need to make sure they all got that support, a one-to-one adults that makes sure that they are entitled to everything through this system. Because that's my concern, that there may be some that slip through the net and are not getting access. But absolutely fabulous way of taking this forward. And it's for 3 years. Isn't that amazing that this commitment has been made by the Welsh Government for the entire time of the next Senedd, and I hope will roll forward throughout the whole of Wales.
Great, thanks for that, Jane, and really interesting actually to hear about your experience in the sector. I know that in my article I referred to a recent Senedd's Petitions Committee with a care experienced mother called Jennifer Malloy, and her account of the stereotype and the stigma actually that she faced, not only as a young mother leaving the care system, but through every single pregnancy that followed. And the stigma that many care leavers face. It shows that the lack of support as these young people leave care is one of the most fundamental reasons as to why they face so many barriers and poverty related issues in their lives. And just if anyone else on the panel wanted to jump in on that question. Yeah, Amerjit? Thank you.
With the question says on the basic income pilot, I think it is a basic income pilot, but it's not a universal basic income pilot, in that the criteria that you would use, I mean, first of all, like you guys were saying, what is it, 250 people to 500 people, it should be a minimum of 1,000 people. And also the it's like targeted selected, so it's difficult to be able to, it's not universal. So in that way, it's not a UBI project in the true sense of the word. Also, where you have people that are in care, this is one thing, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other people who are suffering the same level of poverty and emotional and physical harm as well, because I know social services try to keep children in their homes as well. So I might be the only one here thinking this, but I don't actually think it's a UBI project pilot, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think we'll be very clear as an organisation, this isn't a universal basic income pilot at all. You're very right in saying that. And I agree. I think in some of the campaigning we did was to target, look at how survivors of domestic abuse could be better equipped to leave abusers if they had a basic income. And sadly, this pilot will likely mean that not many people that have experienced domestic abuse will be included. And so I think while we support that care leavers is the focus of this basic income pilot, we would like to see a universal basic income pilot one day. And if I could just go to you, thanks, Beth.
Yeah, very briefly, I agree with lots of what's been said. From the conversations that I've had with Welsh Government and others about the pilot, they recognise the shortcomings. They know themselves that it's not universal, and they've admitted that. And I think as long as that is reflected in the methodology, and incorporated, in the methodology, the measurement tools that are used and the evaluation tools, then those shortcomings should, become evident and be able to be explored further. I think at the end of the day, we've got to accept the Welsh Government's funding still comes from Westminster. They are totally dependent. And I think within the constraints, the funding constraints that they've got, this is a step in the right direction. The fact that they've welcomed Guy Standing and Jonathan onto the expert panel, open critics of the limitations, for me is so refreshing, because they want that critical eye on the pilot taking place. So, very, very positive, within the constraints. The other one thing, which I know we've covered in your excellent article, and I've got to say it is really good, Lydia, today, is the need for this to be intersectional, because obviously care leavers are a very diverse group themselves, and it needs to be as representative as possible of care leavers. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
No, thanks for that, Beth. And yeah, I think there's definitely sometimes can be, in policy, and especially in Wales, that there is just an automatic focus on white Welsh people. And sometimes the response when is questioned as to why wasn't this more diverse is, the BAME community in Wales is 5%. Well, it's not an excuse and it's not adequate. And so I think we really want to push for as much diversity as we can. And as the article mentioned, if for some reason this year's cohort of care leavers is below certain averages from certain diverse communities, then, okay, well, can you go back to last year's group of cohort leavers and make sure that there are key communities represented in this sample? We can then gain some better research than we perhaps would have. So yeah, thank you for that point. So if I could just come to Jane now for the next question. We've got a pilot up and coming, as we've been discussing. So it was the main goal for UBI Cymru over the past 2 years. And now that it has been achieved, where do you see the UBI campaign going next, and where would you like to see it go?
Lots of places, obviously, but let me just start by saying that I might be in total disagreement with some people on the panel, in that I do see this as a UBI pilot. And the reason is that it is about a cohort of young care experienced who have left care. And it doesn't matter if they work or not. It doesn't matter what age they are. It doesn't matter what their background is. So in that respect, with this cohort, there is universality in it. Yes, it is not across the whole of the population. But credit to the Welsh Government where it's due, please, because I think they've just done a brilliant job here. They stuck their necks out big time, you know, I really want to, you know, I'm not Labour, I'm Liberal Democrat, so you know, I am fully behind Mark Drakeford and the team. Where next? Well, where next is that I would love it in a year's time that the Welsh Government is able to tell us the evaluation of the impact on care experience young people, and to start then rolling it out even further. You know, the ideas could be about another group of young people, possibly looking at, you know, the next group upwards, and across Wales again. So, you know, I would really like to see something coming out of this long before the 3 years are up, and that we actually start to see, you know, Lydia, you've mentioned a really important cohort again, that those people affected by domestic abuse and domestic violence. So how do we then roll that out to another group where we can look at how that's affected them and the impact on them? And I think there's so many options. I'm sure the panel are going to come in with those. So yeah, let's see it go big. It's transformational. It really is. It's got the potential and it, you know, Wales, fabulous, so progressive. We've got Sophie here. No other country in the world's got a Future Generations Commissioner. So, you know, isn't it amazing that A, we've got that role, but B, we've got Sophie in that role who's really pushed on this. And, you know, I just think we're just striding ahead. So let's keep on striding.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane. I think, yeah, definitely Sophie's help on this has been instrumental actually in really pushing the policy. So thank you so much, Sophie, on that. And I think just to mention for the audience, the response from Jane Hutt, at least, as to why care leavers were decided to be a focus in the basic income pilot was that due to budgetary constraints, it was better to focus on a smaller group and give them a higher sort of amount of money over a longer period of time than to try and make it stretch a sample. And so, you know, it wasn't what we campaigned for, but we accepted that. That was the ultimate decision. And so if anyone else wanted to come on that question at all. Beth, yeah?
I hope the pilot continues. I know I will be pushing up there in UK Parliament. I know UK Lab Network are doing some brilliant work on this, about trying to push the hand of UK government to pilot this. But like I said in my piece earlier, for me, this is part of a package of reforms that are required. So, you know, I know I'm repeating myself, but in order for Wales to take this to the next level, we need fair funding from UK government. You know, it is inextricably linked to the whole climate crisis that we're facing. You know, we can't look at this in isolation from other factors. I think once the outcomes start appearing from this, I'd like to think, but obviously you can't preempt what the outcomes would be. But from the research that I've read, you know, there are, in terms of cost benefits, the benefits outweigh the costs. And I'd like to think that when the public and politicians and people, you know, who hold the purse strings see that this is actually cost effective, you know, it will gain more traction across the UK as well. So there's all sorts of benefits in terms of what this pilot. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, and I really want to drop it in somewhere, is something that drew me to the UBI Lab network during the COVID pandemic, when they were arguing, or we then were arguing for a recovery UBI. Is about the need for a progressive tax system, and a wealth tax can raise in excess of £260 billion. You know, we've got the funding within the UK to be able to fund a universal basic income, but we need transformative, structural and systemic change to the capitalist system. You know, so this pilot is, for me, going to have an instrumental role in pushing for more radical change at a UK level, which will in turn benefit the people of Wales.
Great, thanks for that contribution, Beth. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of there's been some research to argue that the administration costs of the benefit system, for example, where people are sort of have to prove they're poor and prove how much they're struggling, which is so stigmatized and demoralizing for people. The cost saved from all the administration fees of that would be a real saving. But I just wanted to, Amerjit, did you have anything to add? Sorry.
Yeah, I think definitely what Beth was saying about being more radical. I think because I think being in the Green Party and also the way I think this sort of thing should have been put in place a decade ago. If it was up to me, if I could decide, or if we could decide, it would be a referendum. It would be, how can we push this forward? What I want everybody in Wales, from Anglesey to Cardiff to Barry, to be talking about this. I want people to know about UBI. I mean, the first time I heard about it was in 2017-18 when I met Guy Standing, and I was quite shocked in that I didn't know about this. I want people to know about this. I want there to be a referendum on it, and this is the way Wales can show leadership. It does feel like, okay, there's obviously some hoops to jump through, or some red tape to cut, but we need to be able to do this because we're in a situation that calls for radical and bold leadership, and it's not happening.
Absolutely. No, I'd agree. I think the time is now for transformative action, and goes back to what Sophie was saying earlier, the sort of plastering over of issues in society and almost wiping it away and just ignoring it. So many are suffering, but how much longer can that really go on? And actually back to yourself for the last question. On the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has released another report on climate change, and it sets out measures we can take to tackle the climate crisis. Do you think a UBI could play a key role in fighting against climate change, and how?
Yeah, so in the report, it talks about the SDGs, and obviously SDG 1 and 10, where we have eradication of poverty and the reduction of inequality. Now, we all know, whether it's in this country or whether it's in different countries, that it's the poorest that suffer. The wealthier can kind of almost escape the issues that poverty brings. So, for example, if somebody's poorer, they tend to live and work in congested areas, which which is bad health. Those people then are more reliant on healthcare systems. There's stress involved there. Food and water saturated with toxins obviously causes ill health and disease. Especially in this country, we've got mental health, where we have lack of green spaces. All of this contributes to the situation that we're finding ourselves in terms of inequality, basically. So if UBI was put into place, we would have people who feel more secure. It's as simple as that. And it's going back to the point I made right at the beginning, is that if you put people in an insecure environment, if you have a trend of policies that allow for insecurity in their lives, that's going to have a knock-on effect on everything. They will take jobs that they don't really want to do. People will feel miserable. That will have an impact on children. That will have an impact on children's schooling, which would have an impact on teachers. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure this out, that if you address poverty and if you address inequality, then you're going to be addressing climate change as well, because people will go towards more caring professions. They might want to go, right, I don't want to drive all the way to wherever it is to work. I want to be able to stay at home and have a smaller eco footprint. I want to bring up something that also Guy Standing had said in terms of taxation. So there was the Citizens Climate Lobby in the USA had outlined in Guy's book in 2017, I think it was, where if there was a taxes on polluting industries, on carbon tax basically is $15 per ton raised. The taxes will result in 117 billion a year. You know, the money is there to do it. But I'm going back to the first thing I said at the beginning of this is why it's not being done. You know, which philosophically is quite worrying. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that contribution. And I think it's interesting how you linked, you know, poverty and class to climate change. I think we all know how to make more ethical, climate conscious choices, but the issue is only some of us can, and it does come down to a class issue there. If you can afford to make the ethical choice, and there shouldn't be a burden on working class people who, you know, if you rely on a food bank, you can't choose what food you eat. And I think UBI would empower some more ethical choices if people even had the means to choose what they bought. And if I could just quickly ask Sophie if she had anything to add, because I know you do have to head off slightly earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think Amerjit, you know, made some really good points there about the links between, you know, poverty and the environment. And, you know, environmental justice is a social justice issue, and, you know, we think about them separately, we're kind of really missing a trick. Environmental impact is also a gendered issue. You know, I've been highlighting some issues around, you know, young girls in developing countries being sold off into child marriage simply because their parents can't afford or can't feed them anymore because the climate has meant that the crops aren't growing and so on. So all of these things are kind of interconnected. I know we're talking about poverty here in Wales and the UK, but the reality is, you know, we're quickly, and we have to very quickly transition to a low carbon, zero carbon economy. That is meaning things for people like electric vehicles. It's meaning different ways of buying different, you know, food produce and so on. And I think that I don't think that a UBI is the complete sort of, you know, solution for some of those challenges in terms of how some of those things will impact on the poorest in society. But I think it's got to be one of the tools in the toolkit to make sure that there is, you know, some sort of cushioning of that alongside testing everything that we're doing in terms of the kind of low carbon transition to make sure that it's a just transition. And I think, you know, there are other things that we could be looking at here, like, you know, investing more in public transport, free public transport. That's a solution to, or a tiny part of the solution to poverty, whilst also being part of the solution to, you know, reducing our carbon emissions and so on. So, yeah, I think we've got to look at these things in a kind of connected way, which is often challenging.
No, definitely. And thank you for that, Sophie. Would any other panelists like to come in on this question at all? Yeah, Jane, I can see your hand.
Well, I just wondered, Lydia, if we might be able to hear from some others. I noticed that Harry has his hand up, for example, and there's a few comments as well in the chat. So it'd just be great to involve others. I wonder, Chair, if that would be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were going to come to some questions if we could right now. So, Harry, do you want to go first? I know you can see that you've got your hand up. If you want to unmute and ask a question.
You're still on mute, Harry. Did you want to?
Whilst Harry works
out. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wanted to make a point as somebody who's lately joined the Green Party after years of hesitation, that what we're trying to do with UBI, which I've been campaigning for 10 years or more in different forums, is to stop growth. Growth is the biggest bugbear of our time, and we can no longer afford it. And therefore, that is consistent with the aims of climate emergency. And therefore, I think we want to recognize that stopping growth means greater equality, much greater equality. And UBI is an important tool to achieve that, as I think a number of speakers have already said. And that's the main point I want to make, and I hope that is relevant.
Yeah, thank you so much for that point, Harry. I know myself in looking at climate change when I was younger, I think it was Naomi Klein who has the argument that if our economy is based on growth and profit, then it will never be sustainable. And actually, we need an economy that's based on sustainability and tackling the climate crisis. So I think it really links to your point there. I think it's a really important one. Thank you for raising it. If I could just go to, sorry, Sophie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, love the shout out to Naomi Klein. She also says that growth is no longer growth, it's a malignancy. And I think that, never is a truer word being said, really. And that's part of the challenge. I'm a massive fan of donut economics. And if you haven't read that, it's by Kate Rayworth. It's basically around, if you imagine a donut, like a ring donut, we need to keep everything that we do within that ring of the donut. We go beyond that, we're going beyond planetary boundaries, and so we need policies to stop us going beyond planetary boundaries. And if that means stopping growth, then that means stopping growth. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but it could do. But then we also need policies to make sure that nobody in society is falling in the middle of that kind of ring donut, if you like, which is what's happening at the moment. And we can see at the moment we are going beyond planetary boundaries, we're going beyond the donut, and we've got a lot of people falling through the middle. So I think that, and there's been a Welsh donut economics version that's been done as well, which I'd recommend to everyone. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave because I've got I'm single parenting tonight, and I've got a little one I've got to get to bed.
Oh, thank you so much for coming in. All your contribution, Sophie.
Thank you.
Lydia, can I just, sorry.
Yeah.
Just a really quick point, because I know Beth wants to come in, but I guess it's just a plug, isn't it, for making sure the evaluation of the UBI pilot in Wales on care experienced young people has that green element and that environmental element in it as well. So I'm sure that'll be taken forward. That's all I wanted to say. But it's great to hear from other people who are not the panel, if you don't mind, panel. But it's lovely to hear, isn't it, from people outside of us as well.
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks, Jane. Beth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm going to have to apologise because I'm going to have to leave as well. And I do hope you continue the conversation past 8 o'clock, because I agree completely with Jane in terms of getting as many contributions as possible. So just as a finishing word from me, who would have thought a few years ago that we'd be in this place now in Wales? And it really does show the power of our communities and the power of people and the power outside of political institutions. And, the movements on free school meals is another example. It was people like People's Assembly, Unite Community, the Anti-Poverty Coalition, who lobbied Welsh Government to bring about this change. And I do commend Welsh Government, but these are the sorts of movements that we need to be developing, and now more than ever with the cost of living crisis. So I really look forward to working with all of you moving forward to bring about the change that is required and that people deserve. And I'm sorry I've got to go as well. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, diolch. Thanks for coming in tonight, Beth. It was really great to have you on the panel. Yeah, so if it was okay, I'm going to pop to the chat now and just read through some questions. It's not a question, but we do have a comment here from Laura, who said, as a foster carer, it is so refreshing to hear you speak of the need of support around this. We can't afford to say lessons will be learnt in 3 years' time, as it could be too late for some of our most vulnerable people. And I think that's a really good question, a point to make, sorry. There was a question for Sophie, who has left, off of David, mentioning the wraparound support provided. Will UBI payments have any conditions or requirements attached to for example, a participant such as attendance on courses? And I can answer that one quite quickly, actually. No. So the payments aren't conditional on attending anything. You don't, and also not every care leaver has to actually be involved in the pilot. It is a choice. But what we mean by sort of wraparound support is that one of the biggest reasons care leavers face so many barriers, and actually the transition into adulthood is quite awful for them really, is because they suddenly hit 18 and lose all support, or lose a lot of support, I should say. And, you know, for myself growing up with two parents and not in the care system, my support's never ended. I still live at home at 24. And so for young people that completely miss out on this support, it does lead to statistics like an overrepresentation of people in the care system within the criminal justice system, and how homelessness is quite common among those early years of transition for care leavers. So what we really wanted was regular contact with the people on the pilot, financial advice as well, because for some of them this will be the first time in their lives that they have the vast sum of money that they will be getting, as well as just emotional support, you know, the sort of mental health related that a lot of young people leaving care have, if they wanted to seek professional mental health support in the NHS, or even use the money to privately fund some of that themselves. Just having that support network, and not only for research purposes, but just to make sure that the pilot is the best it can be. We really believe that should be a big focus. We don't want to just, you know, throw money at people and be like, good luck. You know, we really want to actually make sure that these people on the pilot are taken care of.
Lydia, could we hear from John, please? We've only got a few more minutes left, and
yeah,
John
absolutely.
has had his hand up. Thanks.
John, if you just wanted to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. Well, it's more a comment. I first heard of universal basic income, or citizens' income, I think it was called then, about 30 odd years ago. I remember thinking, wow, what a light bulb moment. What an absolutely sensible idea. And here we are 30 years on, and it's now gaining traction, which is brilliant to hear. And the other thing is that the social security system, so-called these days, is an absolute hell for people who are on various benefits, form filling, having to jump through hoops and goodness knows what. The stress it must cause to people is well, no wonder we've got a mental health crisis, caused no doubt by many actions of our current government. But really interesting to hear all the comments, and hopefully we can take this forward from a small cohort of care leavers into the wider community. And it's getting the wider community on side as well, because you know what will happen. People say, oh, you're giving people free money, blah, blah, blah. You know, they'll go and spend it on, you know, wine, women and song or whatever. But it's such, if you can get the message across that it frees people up from stress and worry, creates a more creative world, stops forcing people into jobs that perhaps they don't want to do or are there because they just need the money. So really great to see that, you know, it's gaining momentum after all this time. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really, really good point to raise. And I think something that we've really pushed from the UBI perspective is that actually we need to entrust people that they can make their own informed choices. You know, a food bank isn't a choice, is it? It's where people go when they're destitutely poor and they can't even choose their own food. They have to be given what is available. And, you know, the way the current system's set up to prove how much you're suffering, prove that you're poor before you get any help. Like you say, the mental burden of that is just extreme. And it's not a way to run a just society. So let's start actually believing that people that are in poverty aren't stupid. They know how to spend money. And let's let them have the choice to do that themselves. So thank you for that comment, it's really great. Just check through the audience if anyone else does have their hand up, because I know there's some comments and some questions in the chat. If anyone did want to put their hand up, I could come to you in the audience. However, I'll just check in the chat now. So Linda Rogers has said, nurturing young care leavers is so important. It could really sell UBI to roll it out if we can see the way it helps them. How will the public know without encroaching too much on the lives of young people? Sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Sorry, it's hard to read through the questions at the same time. A lot of people will just leave off. Yeah, Amerjit.
I'd just like to really encourage people to go onto Guy Standing's website and also check out the pilots that have already taken place, and especially the one that they have in Uttar Pradesh. It's not Uttar Pradesh, it's India, it's with kind of where our family are from as well. And you can really see how UBI has benefited people, because some people are saying, well, you know, what are we going to, you know, once the money ends, then what happens then? And you know, there is, you know, you get money here, there's a brain here, and there's an outcome. You know, people will work to be able, you know, the money is there to help and encourage people, as opposed to just it going down the drain. It's not going down the drain. And so I really encourage people just to really look into those pilots, and to help set up UBI labs wherever they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Lydia, I'm afraid I have to go as well. I'm really
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, no worries. We can keep the chat going. But I think,
yeah, do. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Stay in touch.
You.
Diolch. Bye.
And just to say, I think we will end about 8:10. I read out Linda's question there, and I realised she had a hand up. So Linda, if I could just come to you if you wanted to speak at all.
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's potentially really brilliant, and I just wanted to agree that if we could see how it does help those young people, but I don't, when I say encroach on people's lives, I just, you know, that they have their own lives, it's private and so on, but I do feel that we will have a thing where giving away money and all, you know, all those arguments that people have been grown up taught to have, not to be negative about it, but I think it will be a very positive thing. How do we show how positive it's been? That's really what my question was.
And so do you mean the current pilot? How do we show if the current pilot's success? Yeah, so I think other pilots that have gone, just as Amerjit was saying, have shown really useful results, not always in terms of like the economic sense, but a lot of the time have given really positive improvements in people's mental health. And I think a point that's been carried through this event is, while you might not see an improvement in someone's mental health as a financial benefit, it is because that means that that person for that time in their life will not need to use services on the NHS that we know are heavily strained. So any improvements in people's health and well-being are financial improvements, because we know that that is what the government will like to see a result of. And I think it's a really important question. It's something perhaps that we need to make sure it does happen. You know, I know that there'll be constant monitoring of the pilot as it goes along, engaging with people that are on it to see how they feel at different stages. And I think you're absolutely right. Once that data is collected, how do we really celebrate the work that's been done, and show that the best of what the pilot has achieved in Wales? And I think hopefully that will be through just some of the data that we pull out from the pilot. But yes, definitely something to push and think of the longer term plan for that, as opposed to just when we get there. I'll just see if there's any other hands up in the audience as well, or if anyone did want to unmute and ask a question. Yeah, Michelle?
Just putting my microphone on. Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
I'm not going to go over anything else that anybody else has mentioned. And yeah, UBI is, you know, the way out of poverty as far as I can see for everybody. I mean, when you are in poverty, as you've said, what you worry about is the rent, the gas, the electric, the school trip. You don't, you know, you don't think about, you know, how you can improve your life or how you can go forward in your life. But I've got some practical questions, and having been working for a housing charity for decades, they are around housing, and it is about, you know, that a particular barrier to young people in care has always been, if they're in supported housing, that if they went into work, they'd have to pay quite a lot towards their rent. Now, I think that, you know, supported housing providers in Wales will be key to, you know, this project, and I'm wondering, have you had these discussions with them yet about, you know, what happens with that money, you know, because you could see a lot of that £1,600 going towards rent if they are seen as being in work or in receipt of other income, because housing benefit rules are very different to, you know, what we were planning then. And,
yeah.
and the other thing is that, you know, yes, at the end of the 3 years that to do that evaluation, but are you planning on, you know, going back to those young people in another 3 years' time to see, you know, what the impact has actually been on their lives? But I do think that supported housing providers and support workers are people you've got to sell this to make sure that it works for the young people involved.
Great, thank you for that question. I think, yeah, definitely important to perhaps revisit the same cohort and see how they're feeling 3 years after the pilot. I know that the no benefits will be applicable while they're on the pilot. It will be seen as an income. And there are currently some charities set up in Wales that do assist care leavers in housing related issues like Shelter Cymru. But again, housing is something that, yeah, oh, amazing. But yeah, rent is something that, like you said, perhaps the money will be there to be used for, but at least they will have that protection in choosing where the money goes. But again, why we wanted the wraparound support for housing choices and housing advice, for example, and where's best to use their money. So thanks for that question. And just one last question then before we end tonight. So if anyone wanted to raise a hand or just unmute to ask a question. No, I can't see any hands in the audience, but if I can't see one and someone does have a question, if they wanted to just unmute. No, then that's absolutely great. Thanks for tonight's discussion. I think it's, from my perspective at least, been a really lovely evening, and also really great to hear from so many of the audience. I think, you know, having your opinions is just as valuable as having the panels, and it's really nice to have a discussion on these matters that we all care so much about. Thanks to all the panel participants as well. Obviously, most have gone, but Amerjit, thank you so much for attending and for your contributions. And just if anyone wants to get involved, you can follow us on Twitter and join in campaigning if you'd like. And we post regularly about any upcoming events. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone for coming. Bye. Thank you.
Well done, Lyd.
Oh, thanks.
Really
Yeah.
lovely. Well done, guys.
That was really good. Well done.
I realised I haven't hosted in like, I don't even know how long.
You're a pro.
And
You're
as
a
I was
pro.
doing it, I was like, I think this is what you
You did amazing.
Yeah,
Well done.
me and Sam were saying you've done so well, pal.
Oh,
So well.
thanks.
I can better stop the recording now. Actually, how do I do that?
Ooh.